or not say anything, we completely understand. So great. Let me just keep admitting people as they pop up. So welcome everyone, and thanks again for making time to join this webinar today. It's about empowering disabled people in Sri Lanka and Nepal through what we think is a very innovative combination of inclusive dance, that is dance that involves both uh, able-bodied and disabled people with rights awareness. And it's really kind of a form of transformative human rights education. And this particular project, we used it for right to information, or RTI. And so we'll be wanting to talk to you about that. My name is Lars Waldorf. I'm a law professor here at the University of Essex in the UK, and I was the lead academic on two projects that we were fortunate enough to get funding from the UK's Arts and Humanities Research Council. The first project was an action research project and more of a north-south collaboration between us here in the UK and colleagues in Sri Lanka. The second project that we're really focused on today, the Performing Informing Rights, that was really an impact project, and it was more of a south-south collaboration between Sri Lanka and Nepal. And so those of us here in the UK took a little bit of a step back from that. We were involved, of course, but it was really for them to be sharing the information. So I want to briefly introduce some of the project colleagues who will be speaking here today. Obviously, there were a lot more colleagues than are represented and are speaking, and the project simply wouldn't have happened without all of them and their involvement. So Mahesh Umagilia is a Sri Lankan dancer and choreographer. He created the Maranga Fine Arts Ensemble, and he's also the co-founder of Visibility Lanka. And Visibility is the organization that really sort of came up with this novel idea of combining rights awareness and inclusive dance as a way of empowering people with disabilities. And that is not just legal empowerment, but also psychosocial empowerment as well. Unfortunately, Mahesh seems to have a bit of a new strain of COVID, which is circulating in Sri Lanka. So you'll see him, but you won't be hearing so much from him, unfortunately, because he's very short of breath. Then will be also our colleague Mandira Sharma from Nepal. She is a co-founder of Advocacy Forum, which is one of the leading human rights organizations in Nepal. And she now works as an international legal advisor for the International Commission of Jurists. Helena Ulrike Marambio is a human rights scholar and activist. She's currently at the Johannes Kepler University in Austria, and she also is a co-founder of Visibility Lanka, along with Mahesh and along with Gerda Koenig, who is a disabled choreographer dancer based in Germany. And then finally, my co-academic lead on the project, Dr. Hetty Blades. She's an associate professor at CDARE, the Center for Dance Research at Coventry University. So let me just say a quick word about the agenda. What we're going to do is that Helena and Mahesh will talk about the activities and impacts in Sri Lanka. Mandira then will talk a bit about what we did in Nepal, and again, kind of how it was adapted and contextualized for Nepal. Helena will also talk about dissemination and knowledge sharing, the materials that are available out there on our website, as well as a new article we've published. And Hetty will then talk about the larger policy issues around combining dance, disability, and rights. And there we can also, she'll talk a little bit about the policy brief that we circulated and that we're very keen to get your views on before finalizing. Then we'll have a discussion, and then I'll come back at the end just to wrap up and talk about a few next steps. So again, in terms of the webinar logistics, as I said at the outset, we are recording, so just so you're aware of that. And when we get to the discussion section, please feel free to type questions or comments into the Q&A box, which hopefully you see on your screen. If you don't see it on your screen, it may be under the More link on your screen. Or if you're having difficulty or just find it easier, feel free to unmute or ask to be unmuted, whichever the technology allows us to do. So that's enough for me at the moment, and I'll come back later. But let me turn it over to Helena and Mahesh at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. It is nice to see so many people interested in the project and to get many confirmations for attending. Our project had three main goals. That was making alien laws, that means right to information, also called RTI, more accessible to the users through a combination of dance and human rights. Second, turning knowledge into action. So how can we make people really making use of the law? And finally, accessing social protection schemes that people are much dependent on and waiting for. How do we make alien laws more accessible? In terms of, I mean, everyone knows we have the RTI Acts, and RTI Acts might not be necessarily understandable for ordinary user who don't have any legal background. So one of our targets and tasks was to simplify the language, to use movements and gestures to make certain procedures, but also institutions or officers, to make them more symbolized and memorable, and to use symbolic exercises to connect these dots, because most of the time people know there are some officers in place, there are some institutions in place, and there's a procedure, but we don't know how to follow certain ways when we are trying to make when we are trying to navigate the system. And then on the top, we needed to come up with a disability-friendly format, because obviously we have people who have visual problems, people who might have problems to write, not because they don't have the education, but some of them have, for example, they have lost their arms during the war, etc. In terms of turning knowledge into actions, we were really trying hard to find a way, not only through this project, but also in the past, to make people use the law. And most of the time we know knowledge is not enough. We also need to have a certain self-esteem and self-confidence in order to make our way to the officers and to be able to speak up. Turning knowledge into actions also meant that we were using RTI dance. That means we will see a video later on where we show the RTI stages that were trying to connect different stages and procedures and make people understand how they needed to move forward. So throughout our workshops, we were doing different exercises on particular stages, but we were also trying to connect RTI stages, especially towards the end of our workshops in Sri Lanka, when we were doing a little performance and our participants needed to dance the RTI process. Turning knowledge into action also meant that we were trying to help those participants who were willing to submit RTI requests at the end of the workshops to the corresponding authorities. In terms of accessing social protection schemes, obviously we wanted people to find more information about their particular application, if they had submitted an application, if they wanted to know how much budget was distributed from the government to the corresponding district or province. But also they needed help to follow up. So sometimes people had already submitted applications, for example, like application for social protection schemes, and wanted to know whether the application was stuck or where this application was, in what kind of stage it was. How did we start? It was actually not quite an easy way to combine dance and rights education, because when we were coming together as a team, we were coming together from different backgrounds in terms of education, in terms of professions, and also in terms of different sectors. And it was pretty hard at the beginning to find a language among us to understand each other. So we know the law requires a lot of words. Everything is written out in laws and regulations, while dancers like Mahesh rely on movements and like descriptions. And also during the meetings, he was starting to move rather than verbalize things, or when he was trying to explain to us how he would see certain laws or certain procedures. It was also pretty difficult for us to break down complex legal issues into small movement exercises, because we know that the law comes with not only with the acts, but there are regulations. There are also steps in between that we might find in other laws or in other procedures that are not necessarily fleshed out. And how we could simplify that in small movement exercises or short movement exercises that could be understandable for our participants. And then obviously we were trying to facilitate the learning and memorization process through the body and mind. Maybe some of us remember that we were dancing in kindergarten, or we did some exercises at school. And here we were trying to apply a similar approach, but in a different setting and with adults. Another challenge that we were facing were the limits of dance. So for example, in terms of memorizing or in terms of learning, dance was helpful, but then again, people needed to memorize also a couple of other issues, for example, timelines or particular institutions. Or people also needed to solve an issue. For example, how can I address a situation? How can I deal with certain moments? For example, we had a couple of participants before the project, but also throughout the project, were dealing with unpleasant moments, especially when they were harassed by officers when they were trying to obtain information. So we needed to draw on a couple of other creative means. And then another challenge, the final one, was related to the location. So we were trying to work in rural areas and semi-urban areas. How can we make the resource that we were trying to put together in order to compile the exercises, how can we make it most adaptable and flexible to different contexts? So we wanted people to go on and use the exercises and not needing, for example, an expensive hotel room or a particular device, in order to do the exercises later on without us. Another issue was related to culture. So what is appropriate? Because obviously in dance, we are touching each other, we are dancing with each other. What is appropriate here? And then again, we had issues surrounding, in that regard, also concerning gender and disability. And in the case of disability, what is doable? So what kind of movement exercises can we do without excluding anyone? Or what needs to be adapted, for example, when working with a blind person, that he or she can take part without feeling excluded because of visual issues. So this approach was stunning several people, because most of the time when we were saying we are doing rights awareness workshops, people have this particular idea in mind. People are thinking about projectors, people are thinking about long hours sitting around and getting told what to do, receiving copies, etc. And our project was structured in a way that we started off and discussed how we could combine dance and rights, and how we could develop certain exercises. and that we did online because we were starting the project during past COVID periods, and there was still certain restrictions in place. And then we moved on and went to Nepal and did a training of the trainers. And this is one of the statements from one of our partners from Advocacy Forum Nepal, who kindly helped us to set up this TOT. And it basically showed what people had in mind, or that people were always puzzled when we were doing the workshops. Once we were done and we did the TOT and we did some adjustments based on the feedback in Nepal, because again we were working across cultures, we were working across sectors. So for example, lawyers were kind of grappling with how to move, and dancers were grappling with the right language in the workshops. We went on and we started to recruit participants in Sri Lanka and Nepal. And whenever we came across and asked people to join, we were faced with the same questions. So, for example, what do I learn here? So, because law is usually seen as something very serious, and only educated people are knowledgeable and can apply it. Or we got reactions like, oh gosh, not another boring workshops, because some of them have attended a couple of legal awareness workshops on different issues. With regards to disability, disabled people also ask us, especially those ones who were sitting in a wheelchair, how can I dance? What are you expecting from me? Look at me. And then others saw it as a complete waste of time. But that changed over time. So in order to understand what the opportunities are and what also the limits are of this combination, because that was a lessons learned throughout the way for the whole project team. So there was nothing that we could find beforehand in order that we could draw on. There were no lessons learned. There were no like in-depth case studies in what we were trying to do, especially in particular with the right to information and dance. In terms of RTI, I mean, RTI, when we had pre-discussions before the project, but also during the project, we were trying to figure out, and obviously we also needed to sell our idea to people on the ground who were supporting us. So what are the opportunities? RTI obviously tackles gaps. That means we can figure out what kind of information is not provided by the government. It holds institutions accountable. So that means citizens in Sri Lanka, the law is only applicable to citizens. They can hold institutions accountable in an official manner. They don't need a lawyer. So that means it's a tool that people can use at the grassroots. RTI also allows for individual and collective actions, which we will hear later on, because we will hear that some of our participants decided to submit RTI requests in order to figure out what was happening with regards to their personal issues, but also they submitted collective RTI requests to figure out whether the government is planning to make, for example, public transport more accessible. And then again, like RTI supports to address their issues immediately. So they even though many people think they have to go to the capital or they are far away, they can address their issues on the ground in their respective district. In terms of dance, we figured out from the statements that we received from participants, people feel more comfortable in their skin. At the beginning of the workshops, many were very hesitant, didn't know how to move. They made small movements, and they didn't use the whole space, but that changed over time, and people were also more experimental later on. Moving in front of others also helped them to develop self-esteem and self-confidence. Also being seen, being, for example, dancing with each other, observing other people's movements, etc. We will see later on also in an exercise, the yes and no exercise, that one person, for example, needs to stand in front of another group and the group needs to react to what the one person is doing, and vice versa. The dance also invites for sharing experiences without words. So here in the Western world, we are maybe more familiar with therapy. So we go and talk about our issues, or we share our issues with friends. But then again, there are moments where we cannot share our feelings and our stories that are so deep within us with words. And dance can be a way to express ourselves differently. We also figured out that dance can enhance learning and critical reflection, because one way, on the one hand, we were doing these exercises in order to make people understand the RTI process, but then also we realized that whenever we had something in mind that we wanted people to reflect on in the exercise, people came up with other issues. That they were also relating to what was going on in their lives. And then again, dance promotes individual and collective actions, and that goes hand in hand with RTI. So RTI is more like a technical matter, but dance then again helps people just to break their shells, to speak up in front of others, either by themselves or in a group. Mandira, I know that you are talking about giving 5, so I'm just giving 4 examples here. We have developed these 4 exercises, for example, were developed to make people to understand the presence of rights in people's lives. So rather than going to our participants and telling them this is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we were asking them, what are you doing during the day? How do you start your day? And then people were coming up, I'm waking up, I'm doing the dishes, I am taking my child to school, I'm going to the temple to pray, etc. And we were trying to connect certain activities with rights to make them understand how rights are embedded in our lives. Give me 5 relates to the RTI stages. So we have 5 key RTI stages in each act. And these are the stages that people need to run through in their respective district or in their municipality. And then there are additional steps that additional stages that people can apply when they are going to the national bodies, for example, the RTI Commission, and then later on to the courts. Yes and no relay is an exercise that, again, helps boosting self-esteem and self-confidence. So people, one person is standing in front of the other group, is shouting yes, and the big group shouts no back. So it's about being seen and working with power relations. And then power imbalances, what people also call ribbon dance, is an exercise that tries to make people reflect about the power. So if one person is pulling, the other person needs to hold back, and this is basically an interplay between duties and responsibilities between a disabled person or a citizen and an officer. So in order to maintain a balance, at some point one person needs to push and the other person needs to pull. So what are the limits of right to information and dance? During our project, we figured out, especially when our participants towards the end of the workshops were submitting or were trying to submit their RTI requests to the information officer, for example, in Sri Lanka. That's the first entry point when people have queries, that officers, or especially information officers, didn't know what to do, or they didn't take people serious. Another issue that came up, particularly in Nepal, were power imbalances, and some participants also flagged back that they felt a certain way of discrimination, especially, and that was particularly mentioned by women. We also noted that enforcement at the local level was weak. And there we saw a couple of differences between Sri Lanka and Nepal, and maybe Mandira, you will say something more about that in the case of Nepal. For example, as I noted before, the law was not necessarily known on the ground in Sri Lanka, but later on, after participants were doing the appeals, for example, or were supported by Visibility Lanka, who was also submitting RTI requests, suddenly officers started to act upon and were providing information. Given the hurdles, the process, we also realized the process requires stamina and also requires funding. For example, not every single participant has the money to submit an appeal or to go back and submit an appeal, or to remind the officer that the time is almost up, because in Sri Lanka, for example, there are 14 working days until people can receive the information. RTI requests also, in order to write RTI requests, there were some also challenges in Sri Lanka and also Nepal, and that was not only related to the literacy level, but also, as I noted before, concerning the physical ability to write. And we were trying to work around, for example, that participants helped each other or that the team was helping, but we also try to make participants understand that officers also need to help people. And there again, we found a couple of differences in the law between Sri Lanka and Nepal, because in Sri Lanka, it is particularly said that the information officer, for example, needs to help the person to submit the application if he or she cannot write. Overall, as I noted before, when we were designing the project and starting to experiment and trying to bring both right to information and dance together, there's very little available data out that we could rely on, or that we could use in order to learn from others, or that we could share also with participants with regards to lessons learned from other countries, but also for us as a team, just to make sure that we are doing the right thing. Because most of the things, or most of our journey, was basically learning by doing. In terms of dance, obviously dance means movement. And in the end of the day, people need to write their application form or their RTI request or whatever the law is saying. Because in Sri Lanka, for example, we have forms that people could submit from the government website, whilst in Nepal, they had to write a couple of letters, or they needed to figure out how to write the letter. There are also, what we also realized, the workshop did not necessarily prepare people for very tense verbal exchanges with officers on the ground, especially when they were going to the district secretariats and trying to figure out what was going on with their RTI requests when it got stuck. And there we realized, whilst we were including a couple of exercises in terms of how to solve a situation, especially when we have a tense situation, we were realizing that if we are applying any project in the future, we would need to have more support from someone who could help us to produce a couple of exercises in terms of mediation. So how do I stay calm if I get harassed? How do I get out of this situation, etc. And then we also realized that dance made people become more comfortable in their skin, that they started to open up. They also started to open up at home and talk to family members in a way that they have not spoken up before. But then again, that also led to a couple of tensions at home. Or when people with disabilities wanted to take more actions and submit more RTI requests, they did not necessarily get the required support at home to submit their victory requests. And that led again back to the needed support by the partner organization Visibility Lanka that helped out with writing RTI requests and submitting RTI requests after receiving the signature. because in Sri Lanka, RTI requests can be submitted online, like in person, or they can also be sent via post. So in terms, what are the results of this? Was it actually successful? And there are some differences, and I'm sure that Mandira will also draw upon this later on. So in Sri Lanka, as I said, we had some individual RTI requests. We also had 3 group RTI requests. There was less output, but the output that we got was helpful for people who were really trying to figure out what was going on with my payment. So, for example, we had participants where the monthly financial support suddenly stopped and they didn't know why. Or they received Samoti, which is one of the poverty protection schemes, and they didn't know why they were not given this despite the family situation. We also have 3 appeals to the RTI Commission going on in case of some motis where people haven't received any responses so far. But then again, according to the law, there are no timelines, and we know that the RTI Commission in Sri Lanka is working really hard. So we are waiting for some responses there so far. So I'm turning over to Mandira now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Helena, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I just want to echo what Helena has said, and without repeating what she has already said, I just wanted to reflect on some of our experiences and how the dance as methodology helping us to really empower people with disabilities in demanding their rights, also using Right to Information Act in Nepal. Just to put these things into context, we also had internal armed conflict in Nepal. We estimate that 2.2% of total population of Nepal suffers from disability, various kind of disabilities. But our focus in this project is the disabilities resulting from internal armed conflict. That counts about 5,000 people. That's a very conservative kind of estimation. Many of the victims also got injured, resulting on their disabilities because of the explosions of unattended landmines after the end of conflict. After the comprehensive peace agreement, after the end of the war, there was a peace agreement, and there was a process, after the peace agreement in terms of providing monetary compensation and interim relief for conflict victims. But the conflict victim was defined as those people who suffered injuries or kind of various kind of harms from the day the war started until the date when the comprehensive peace agreement was signed. But many of the victims that we were working with, or the people who, with the disabilities, they were also the victims, or their disability was resulted from the explosions of unattended landmines after the end of the conflict. So these categories of people were actually put outside of the ambit of those interim relief, compensations, or any other social services that was offered to these categories of victims of the conflict survivors. So in this context, we were actually trying to bring this knowledge that Sri Lanka had already experimented to Nepal. I was very, very illuminated when I first saw some of the footages of the dance that was performed by the people with disabilities, especially from the conflict in Sri Lanka, when I was sharing an office with Helena in University of Essex when we both were doing PhD. I have been working with the conflict survivors for a number of years in Nepal, and the Advocacy Forum, the organization, human rights organization that I co-founded, had also worked with the conflict survivors for a number of years. We were also using Right to Information Act for various purposes, but we had not really explored possibilities of using this in the benefit of people with disabilities. As Helena mentioned earlier, the literacy rate in Nepal is also very low, especially those who were affected by the conflict and those who were made disabled. The literacy rate is even lower in that community. So in that context, providing information or knowledge or trainings about their rights, especially using Right to Information Act or their rights in relations to social benefits, social services, and others, is a little bit complicated as well, especially for those lawyers and human rights defenders who are very much trained on using papers, pen, projectors, and lecture methods. But we try to bring that experience of Sri Lanka to Nepal, and we partnered with the organization called National Network of Disabled Conflict Victims. That is a national umbrella organizations of people who were made disabled during the conflict or as a result of conflict. And we targeted those leadership of the National Network of Disabled Conflict Victims and those human rights defenders and lawyers working with those victims in Nepal. This was a TOT that we organized in Nepal. So when we first started to conduct our TOT, when all the participants came to the venue where we were going to have this training, everyone was very surprised because there were no chairs in that room, there were no PowerPoints, there were no pen, there were no papers. But then everyone was asking, how are we going to conduct trainings, or even like trainers, trainings for trainers on right to information without this thing. So everyone was very surprised because this is how we were used to with getting trainings. And more so, everyone was very surprised that we were going to do this training through dance, because everyone was saying that, no, I have not danced in my lifetime, or I cannot dance. Some were saying that I don't have legs, which is required for the dance. Some were saying that, no, I don't have my hands. So that was the first kind of reactions that we encountered. And I was also very curious how it goes, how we tailored this in our context. But thanks to Mahesh, who had already worked with the people with disabilities using dance in Sri Lanka, helped us to co-create some of these steps that really illuminated everyone in the room. And I just wanted to share with you that Right to Information Act is a very technical kind of piece of legislation. Rights of people with disabilities also very complex. There are different pieces of legislations that provide different kind of benefits to the people with disabilities. And in absence of information, these people were not able to access even those remedies or services that was available for them. So in that kind of context, we wanted to use Right to Information Act. We wanted to train people on Right to Information Act so they could actually be empowered to demand their rights that exist in Nepal for people with disabilities. As I said, Right to Information Act itself is a little bit complex. if you actually ask any person who has been working on this issue even for a number of years, it's very complicated, because first you have to identify the information officer, because information under this Right to Information Act, every public office has information officer. You first have to go to the information officer seeking the information about your rights or anything that you wanted to know. And then you have to wait for certain days, like 15 days. And then within 15 days that, the information officer will provide you information. If you are not happy with information, or the information officer refused to provide information, then there is a sort of limitation, what we call a statutory limitation. Then within 7 days, you have to go to the office in charge, and then you have to wait for another 7 days. And then if the office in charge provide you information, that's good. If not, or if you are not happy with the information provided, then you have to go to the commissions within 35 days. And then you have to wait for another 60 days. So it's very complicated. The process itself is complicated. You have to remember all these different days, limitations within that process. So it's very difficult for persons who have not been exposed to this kind of procedures, and also don't have, the formal kind of literacy rate, who cannot write and read, to really have all these process know and then claim their rights. But it's very, I'm very excited to share that through dance, actually, we were able to communicate or disseminate or impart this knowledge to all those participants of this training, to really remember all those different steps, and also all those different dates and the procedures without any difficulties. They were like, and it was done through different steps of dances, and it was co-created. So that whole process was not just only empowering, playful. They didn't have to really stress in remembering all those different dates and procedures as they were enjoying dancing. But at the same time, they were also empowered to really claim their rights. So at the end, everyone was saying that, oh, I really want to file these petitions because I wanted to know whether my municipality or my ward has allocated any benefits for conflict affected people or people with disabilities in my community. And they were also at the same time saying that I feel very relaxed coming to this training. This was first time that I felt very relaxed while sitting in the training program. So it was, on the one hand, knowing what your rights are, at the same times also enjoying or feeling empowered through the process. Everyone was feeling that, oh, I thought I would never be able to dance, but I could dance. I could express myself. We had a colleague who was completely blind, who had never seen people dancing, and he didn't know how to dance. And first question that he had in the beginning was that how he is going to participate in this process. But at the end, he was the one who said that first time in my life I enjoyed being a human being. So it's very it's really emotional in a way, how these simple steps could actually transform the way people learn certain things. So it's also challenged some of our traditional methods through which we were trying to impart knowledge, especially human rights education, human rights, rights-based kind of tool. The knowledge that we wanted to impart on rights of people. There could be a sort of different ways in delivering that, and we really learned this through this process. And because of this, those participants who participated in this training, have gone back to their community. As Helena was mentioning in the beginning, they have filed different petitions, 18, I think, different RTI-related petitions, and the government has responded, or the various institutions where they had filed the complaint, out of 18, 17 have responded to their questions or their request. Although these are more generic, but in this process, the authorities, the public officials are also made aware of different benefits or social services, social benefits exist for people with disabilities, which they were not aware in the beginning. So it's also sort of training those public officials as well that these rights exist for the people with disabilities. These obligations exist in relations to their work. So it's quite as Helena mentioned, transformative kind of approach in imparting human rights educations. And because of the conversation that we had in this process, the network of the national network that I mentioned of the disabled conflict victims have been engaging with different provincial governments in terms of demanding the more disabled-friendly relief scheme for those categories of victims. And as I mentioned, they were excluded from the definitions of the victims at the first place because of the conversations and all these different exposures that we have through various, these kind of trainings. They have also been able to influence the draft, which is under considerations of the Parliament, that expands the definitions of the victims. We are in the process of establishing transitional justice mechanisms through the law, and the law is in the process of amendment. And the issue of these categories of victims is now reflected in the bill, which is under considerations of the Parliament. Similarly, they have been also able to influence different provincial governments in terms of allocations of resources for these categories of victims. They have been also seeking more information. And then through that process, they are also calling for a more robust legal framework for the protection of people with disabilities in Nepal. So in terms of the methods, it's simple, it looks simple, but it's very, very powerful. And I think those human rights defenders and lawyers participating in this training are actually considering this as a method, even to be applicable in other contexts as well, in terms of imparting knowledge on rights of people. So that's what I wanted to share. If there are more questions, I'll be happy to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandira. So I am going to share a video clip that this is the exercise Give Me 5, where participants learned the 5 key stages of the RTI process in each country. Obviously, it was adapted to both contexts. You will see some scenes from the TOT in Nepal, but also from our workshop participants. Please let me know if you don't hear the sound. We have made a couple of tests, so I hope it's playing now. So what we were seeing in this exercise were basically the 5 key stages. And how does an exercise like such works? Obviously, we have an idea of what we want to do, but the exercises that we were designing only provided a frame. So we were saying, for example, in order to develop the RTI process, we asked our participants to come up with movements or a gesture. So a movement, for example, that relates to the submission of the RTI request to the information officer. Then you might have seen some movements related to the timeline, where people were counting how many days do they have to wait until the next step, for example, until they receive a response or by when they can appeal. And then the main task of the facilitators of the workshop means the dancers and choreographers, or the people of the network in Nepal, or the lawyers. They needed to find a way how to connect these movements. And that ended up in this RTI dance that I was talking about towards the end. So coming back to the presentation. So I just wanted to mention, because Mandira nicely fleshed out the different stages in Nepal. So these graphics we designed to submit to our participants, and they could also, on the one hand through the internet, but they were also able to share them through WhatsApp messages or Signal if they had these devices. And in addition, we were also drafting a guidance note that was a bit more fleshing out certain information and certain key steps with more information and detail. If you would like to learn what we have done in the past, and if you would like to have a look at our website, I'm just going to share another link with you. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I prepared everything, but in the moment when it should happen, nothing is happening. So you should see the website, performinginforming.uk, where you can download the training resource. So the training resource at the moment you find for Nepal and Sri Lanka. And over the next weeks, for those who are interested to receive the information in native language, we will have Sinhala and Tamil coming up over the next weeks, and Nepal a little later. There you find all the exercises that we have developed for different purposes. For example, icebreakers, warm up, what kind of exercises are helpful to build agencies from the inside, and also what kind of exercises you can use in order to make people understand the RTI process in concrete, in terms of using the forms. For example, in the case of Nepal, what they need to do, for example, in order to find the particular information before they are making a request, because sometimes they need to do a little research on particular matters, for example, if they have questions concerning the budget, etc. Then you also will have the possibility to look at the videos that we have developed to showcase some of the exercises, because sometimes it's easier just to watch what we are trying to verbalize. And in addition, if people would like to know what participants have said, or would like to know a little bit more about our journey, just have a look at our article. It's accessible in English, so just feel free to go on our website. So I turn it over to Hetty now, who will say a couple of things about our policy briefs and further dissemination.
Thank you. Thanks, Helena. Really great to see you all here today. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the policy brief that we've been developing as a way to share some of our findings and recommendations, So you all received a copy of that before the webinar, and it's something we're still really working on, and would really welcome any kind of general thoughts that you might have about it. So I'll just talk a bit about how we're thinking about kind of approaching that, and then I won't reiterate everything that's in the draft, but I'll briefly outline some of our key recommendations. So I think one of the really exciting things about this work is the way that it crosses lots of different areas of practice and potentially policy, but that's also been a kind of key challenge for us in thinking about articulating policy brief. It has lots of different audiences, and so we're really been thinking about how to demonstrate what we see as the value and importance of this work to lots of different groups. One of the things we really wanted to do is to foreground the practice and also the experience of the participants. So we've included kind of brief examples of some of the exercises and quotes, but we really then are also aware of the need to be very succinct. So we're kind of grappling with how to draw people into the work and really give them a kind of sense of the work, but also keep it very short and kind of to the point, as we know that these things need to be. So in terms of our recommendations, we've got 4 key recommendations at the moment. So for rights advocates, we're recommending to think about using inclusive dance as a way to make human rights education more fun, embodied, memorable, and potentially more transformative. For RTI practitioners, we're recommending to increase outreach to groups who can use RTI to challenge discrimination and exclusion in accessing social protection. Then we're recommending for dance practitioners to think about adding human rights awareness to community dance projects with groups that experience discrimination and exclusion. And for developmental actors, to support more projects that connect people's empowerment and government accountability in relation to social protection. So speaking very broadly about our findings, with one kind of key finding is that this combination of dance and human rights education has helped to inform people about their rights. And another key area that we've been kind of discovering throughout the projects is that some participants through the work have an increased sense of empowerment after participating in the workshops. So our conclusions are that this approach of combining inclusive dance and human rights education has helped disabled people in Sri Lanka and Nepal to know their rights, including RTI, and their entitlements to social protection, and also, really importantly, to develop the confidence to act on this knowledge. So it's this combination of kind of informing people and educating people, and this sense of empowerment and increase in self-confidence and self-esteem in order for them to be able to kind of enact the information that they've learned. But we're really aware of the kind of limitations in terms of the research, and particularly in these kind of relatively short-term projects, that there is further research needed to really ascertain and understand the medium and longer-term impacts of this work. We're really keen to kind of stress that we believe that human rights educators and movement practitioners could work together more, and this is a really fruitful collaboration. And we're hoping that movement practitioners might think about using the resources that we've developed through these projects to train human rights educators in embodied approaches. Another thing we really want to kind of foreground and think about a bit more is sustainability, and in particular sustainability that doesn't necessarily require significant costs. So we want to foreground how collaboration between practitioners already working in these areas, as well as things like coaching and mentoring, can continue to help people to support and develop their practices without necessarily huge amounts of investment. So with the brief that we've been working on, once we've kind of finalised that, we're planning to share with funders, with development organisations, as well as practitioners of dance and human rights education. So we're kind of crossing the policy and practice fields. And so a few key organisations that we're going to approach with this work include the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNESCO, the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and also community dance organisations and networks. So, for example, here in the UK, we have organisations such as People Dancing and One Dance UK. But we'd really love to hear from you with any suggestions about specific people or organisations who might be interested in hearing from us about this work and our policy and practice recommendations, and also any particular recommendations you might have about ways to engage relevant policymakers. And as I mentioned at the beginning, any other kind of general comments on this draft document would be really, really welcome. So if you have suggestions for that, please feel free to email either Lars or myself. And I think that's it for policy. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much, Hetty. Let me now invite people if you want to ask questions or put questions into the Q&A. And thank you, Vip, for kicking us off and starting it. So the question that Vip had asked is really around whether, as a result of the trainings, that whether participants were able to, in a sense, stand their ground with officers, government officers, and government officials, particularly around claiming right to information and making RTI requests. So I don't know, I know, Mahesh, we haven't really heard from you, but if you're not too breathless, if you want to say a word or two on that, and then I would invite Mandira and Helena to maybe come in and say a word about, again, whether participants were able to stand their ground. So Mahesh, I don't know if you're okay with saying something.
I think, Lars, it's better to better Helena or somebody address about this issue.
Okay, great. And I know Vinatine, I think you're on, who was our RTI person in Sri Lanka, is on the call, so feel free to also weigh in. Helena, do you want to come in on that, and or also Mandira?
Hi, Lars.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So this is really a good question. I think that was one of the initial concerns that some of the participants also had. So in some places, they have actually gone in a group because they thought that if we go alone, they may not respond. They have never responded us. They have not recognized us, because of the hierarchy that we have. That sort of issues were there in the beginning. In some places, we also accompanied the human rights defenders, lawyers also accompanied them. But over the period of time, as they filed more than one applications, I think the authorities also became a little bit aware at the local level. So they have started to do by themselves. So it's a bit of a process. Initially, it was a little bit difficult, but over the period of time, in the context where they have filed more than one applications, we have seen some changes as well. So I would hope that more they use these tool, I think they would be more confident and stand firmly on their ground.
Great, thank you very much, Mandira. Also, as Mahesh knows, we went and did a presentation in Sri Lanka last September to the RTI Commission. And in the presentation, Mahesh and his colleagues, Vinatine and others, brought up the fact that a few, not a lot, but a few of the participants who had gone and made RTI requests met with some pressure from local officials who weren't happy about this, and some harassment and the like. And so we made that clear to the RTI Commission. The RTI Commission took it very seriously, took some details from us, and said that they would look into this. Also, what was really nice is that Mahesh and his colleagues also did a presentation to the NHRI, the National Human Rights Institution in Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan Human Rights Commission, and they were very interested in this combination of dance and rights as a way of reaching more people and making more people aware and interested in their rights. And they're putting that into their this year's sort of annual plan to, again, make human rights education, in a sense, more playful, more interactive, more participatory, and hopefully, as a result, more transformative. Helena, I didn't know if you wanted to come back in on Vip's question as well.
I think as Mandira said, in some cases, also in Sri Lanka, they went together. In some cases, they sent someone else who was also part of our participants group, but who had more self-confidence to speak up and who was also engaging with officers before. But overly, yeah, there is some need to help people to speak up, especially, and that relates to Susan Reed's questions as well. For example, if family members are not necessarily helpful in the sense that they do not want the person to take actions. So there is this, there is some hesitation to interact with the district secretariat. People are also afraid that that some officers could pull some of the benefits that they could already receive based on the queries that they are making. And that, for example, other things could happen. So we are aware that some officers were calling some of the participants in other projects just to ask, why are you making these questions? You should not make these questions. And then Disability Lanka also needed to step in and submit an RTI request of the duties and responsibilities, but also had meetings with the district secretary to make sure that officers stop doing taking these actions which are actually against the law.
Great. Let me address some of the other questions that have come up. And again, thank you very much for putting these in the Q&A box. So Susan, you made the point about what the role of the family is in the workshops, and in quite a number of the workshops and even in the performances in Sri Lanka, family would be present. And that was a way of getting them on side, getting them involved, and also responding to the concerns of one of our advisory board members, Mario Gomez, who is in charge of the International Center for Ethnic Studies in Sri Lanka, which has done a lot of really fabulous work in the past on disability. He was very concerned about us involving carers, including family members, but not exclusively family members. Let me just sort of just quickly mention the other questions. So Amila, you asked whether we have examples of the use of inclusive dance in education around the political rights of people with disabilities. I suppose it depends. I mean, RTI in some ways, I think, is a political right. And certainly some of the questions that they were asking went to, there was questions about sort of education disability inclusivity in terms of education. And so those were, in a sense, sort of political issues, but we haven't really found a whole lot of other examples where inclusive dance was being used. But again, I'll leave it to some of my colleagues to maybe bring in examples that I maybe just not thinking of at the moment. Rajol asked whether there are penalties if designated information officers refuse to give information or violate orders passed by the Information Commission in Nepal and Sri Lanka. So I'll let maybe Mandira answer that for Nepal, and Helena, if you can answer that for Sri Lanka. And then before I go to that, just Marina asked whether you can have the PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, we'll put that up on our website. And in terms of, different roles that people played here, we can certainly give we can provide contact information so that you all can get in touch with us. Sarah Waitley from the Center for Dance Research in Coventry University, who is also very helpfully on our advisory board. She asks about regarding sustainability in relation to mentoring. Is there a plan for current participants to receive mentoring training so they will gain from development and in time be able to deliver the activities to continue them and expand them over time? That is something that we were able to do somewhat with the earlier performing empowerment project. It's something that I think we're doing, but more on an ad hoc basis. In this project, part of the reason for that, again, is kind of, as Hetty mentioned, kind of the short-term funding schemes. And so, again, I think there are ways to do this mentoring, as Hetty mentioned, that would not cost very much at all, but still getting it off the ground can take a little bit. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is do some further follow-on funding to sort of keep this network and the participants to, in a sense, they can then start to train other people in their communities as well. So if people have suggestions, ideas for that, or want to collaborate with us, that would be great. Just drop us a line, let us know. Let me go back to maybe Mandira in terms of whether you know, in response to the question, whether there are penalties for information officers who don't give the right information or are reluctant to take requests, and Helena, whether you know that as well.
Mandira has currently problems with her Zoom and is trying to reconnect. Usually what happens is when designated officers are not providing the information, people, as we have maybe already said, is that they can appeal with the RTI Commission and they need to follow those issues and or the request from the RTI Commission. And if the person does not receive the information, then there's another step, they can make an appeal with courts. We are not aware of any disabled person who has ever made that step, because usually, as we have heard, doing RTI requests is already a massive step or measure that people are doing at the local level. But I'm happy to ask, for example, Mario Gomez, who unfortunately couldn't attend today, whether there are some people who have done that. I think Mandira keeps on having problems, so we might want to continue, Lars.
Great, thanks. And then, so one of the questions from Alexandra, I gather from North Macedonia, was did we provide trainings for officers as well? Dealing with the selected target group is specific, requires more empathy and skills to address the needs and requests. Are there websites with tools for disabled people to be able to access the content? Just to try to address this very quickly, the RTI Commission in Sri Lanka, when we met them, they were certainly aware that their website and materials needed to be more accessible to disabled people, and were willing to do steps in that direction. We are also trying to, as we get, part of the reason that we did videos as well was to kind of try to make some of our materials, which are written and will be in Tamil, Sinhala, and Nepali as well, to try to make them more accessible to people who may have difficulty reading for literacy or disability or other reasons. In terms of providing training for officers, in earlier workshops in the performing empowerment and some of the other workshops that Visibility Lanka has done in Sri Lanka, they would invite local officials, local government officials, that could be social welfare officers, but also on occasion information officers to attend. And part of that was about making them more aware and helping them with learn more about the RTI laws, but also because, in a sense, it was harder for them to, after they were maybe dancing with some of the participants, it might be harder for them to refuse requests from them in the future. Helena?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that. So officers were basically, they had no other choice than to attend people later on. because in the workshops we were also saying, so if there are any issues, please approach XYZ in the future, and he or she is happy to help. But on the other hand, I guess these workshops also created some tensions, because obviously people had some bad experiences with certain people, so there were certain hesitations. So there are some pros and cons inviting officers to these workshops, and especially if the community doesn't have a really good experiences with the office, if there's lots of corruption going on or lots of harassment, yeah, there is a need for further digging before officers are put together with participants, and that is also a big learning that we did, that we had to go through over the last years. Just to note, Mandira keeps on having problems, and she apologizes. She has tried to come back a couple of times, but unfortunately, she's not able to reconnect.
Great. Alexandra, no, but thank you. I mean, your point is actually very important, because it's not enough that, it's not enough that in a sense, the rights, whether it be on RTI or other rights, you have to address it both at the demand side and the supply side. Addressing simply one side will not work. And so that's very true. And some of the work that's been done more generally around empowerment, participant accountability programming shows that very, very clearly. And so while, the RTI Commission in Sri Lanka has done, I think, more outreach to individuals and training to RTI officers, they could probably do more on both sides of the equation. And hopefully this sort of use of dance and all is a way to do that. So again, even though this project was focused on RTI, it could be applied to other rights as well. Even though we were focused on disabled people, you could look at other marginalized, disempowered, oppressed groups as well. So that's a very good point. Let me just see if there's any final questions. I think that was it. Helena, you want to come back in?
Yeah, just maybe one last point in terms of South-South learning from RTI Commission to RTI Commission. I think our partner Nepal at Advocacy Forum did a great job. So, for example, provided by the government, by the Sri Lankan government, to people. So, for example, all the forms that people can fill in different languages, the guidelines. There are some easy read guidelines which are still a bit complicated to read, but it's a try. The act, etc. And they went on with all the materials and handed them over to the RTI, to some of the RTI commissioners in Nepal, who were actually who were seemed to appreciate this measure, because some of them were saying, oh, this type of information and the way how people are informed about certain laws or some regulations, or that forms are already provided that people simply need to fill in, seemed to be very helpful in their eyes. But then again, there's more research needed to figure out whether there are any steps taken based on that meeting.
And again, I'm sure, Alexandra, as you know, and other people on this call know, is that, organizations like the International Conference on Information Commissioners, which will be in Albania in June, sort of bring people from information commissions around the world together to share experience and information. And so I know when we met with the RTI Commission in Sri Lanka, they were very interested in what the Nepal RTI Commission is up to and what they could possibly learn from them. So you may see some of us at the ICIC this year, which would be great. So again, I guess maybe to finish up, because we're just over time, is again to appeal to people following up on what Hetty said. If you have suggestions for the policy brief, we'd love to hear them. Toby Mendel from the Center for Law and Democracy, which has done a lot of work on RTI, wasn't able to join us, but he did very helpfully send 2 suggestions for us on the policy brief. So please join him and others in doing that. And let us know other ideas for if you have suggestions for who we can target with that policy brief and specific policymakers that you think might be helpful for us. Also, if you use the training resource, whether it be for disabled people, whether it be for your RTI or however you decide to use it or be inspired by it, let us know. And we'd really be interested in how you tweak it, how you contextualize it, how you adapt it, very much as the colleagues in Nepal did it differently from colleagues in Sri Lanka. And then finally, if you're interested in maybe exploring further collaborations with us, and including trying to get some additional funding to do more of this work in other parts of the world, that would be great. One of the things that we're really, I've been wanting, that Hedy and I and Mahesh and Mandira have been talking about for a while, is to do now kind of a South-North collaboration. And so to bring people from Nepal and Sri Lanka to work with people doing RTI here in the UK, and learn from them and try to adapt it here. So I think that would be a wonderful thing. So again, trying to find funding for that, always difficult, but worth a try. And again, if you have ideas or would want to join in with doing sort of a South-North collaboration with the transfer going more south to north, that would be wonderful too. So thank you all very much for attending. It was wonderful to see you all, particularly after having written to a number of you. And sorry we couldn't make it more participatory and interactive, but again, hard when there are so many of you. But we were just thrilled that so many were interested, and so many folks contacted by the ICIC came and wanted to be part of this today. So thank you. And thanks again to my colleagues, Helena, Hedy, Mandira, and Mahesh, and all the teams in Nepal and Sri Lanka that made this possible, because without them, this wouldn't have happened. Simple as that. So thank you all very much for joining us. We'll get the recording and the PowerPoint up on the website. Feel free to share that with other people. Mandira, you're back. So I'll let you say the final words since you struggled to get back. You can just thank everybody.
Thank you. I'm really sorry that my line was disconnected for the timing. But yeah, it's just to share. It's just like eye-opening for us to really get this knowledge from Sri Lanka to Nepal. And there was one question whether we could really use this in other contexts, in other rights issues. And I would think that yes, because RTI is relevant in many rights issues. So we could actually do that. But I hope that there will be more opportunities to have these conversations and take it forward. But thank you, Lars, Helena, Mahesh, and everyone for giving this opportunity. And also thank you all for joining. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.